In the winter months of 1959, a skiing group was formed to perform an expedition across the northern Ural Mountains in the province of Sverdlovsk Oblast in the Soviet Union. All of the members were very experienced hikers and skiers, but unbeknownst to all involved, the trip that they were embarking on would tragically lead to all of their deaths and lead to a decades-long investigation. What happened on those cold and desolate mountains? Come with me as we unravel the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. It all began when Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineer student from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, assembled a group of well-trained fellow and former students. Each of these people selected were no strangers to these types of expeditions, with a Grade 2 experience certification, and upon their return from this expedition, they were all to receive their Grade 3 certification, the highest level one could achieve in the Soviet Union at the time. The group that was assembled initially consisted of 10 people, 8 men and 2 women, and as you could probably guess, this expedition was not for the faint of heart, but Dyatlov and his team were confident in their abilities. The expedition, which was mapped out and planned by Dyatlov, was originally supposed to have him and his team travel 10 kilometers, or 6.2 miles, from the small Russian town of Vizhai to the Gora-Ortorten mountain. The route that Dyatlov devised was estimated as a Category 3 on the number 5 trail, and was scheduled to take place in February, the most difficult time to traverse. Dyatlov and his team left their hometown of Sverdlovsk on January 23, 1959, and traveled by train to Ivdel. They reached Ivdel in the early morning of January 25th, then took a truck to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement on their journey. By the 27th, the team was fully rested and prepared. But just as the expedition was getting underway, one of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, fell ill with severe joint pain and left the expedition before making it very far, promising to meet up with them once Dyatlov and the others returned. As the group were making their way through what is now called Dyatlov Pass, the weather took an unexpected turn for the worse. But despite the unfavorable weather conditions, the team arrived at the base of the mountain by January 31st. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to the team, because of the harsh conditions and decreasing visibility, the team had actually deviated west, and were not climbing Gora-Ortorten, but were actually at the Kholat Sigil mountain, which, when translated, means Death Mountain. When Dyatlov and his team realized their mistake, they decided to set up camp on the side of a mountain and reassess the situation. Dyatlov and his team could have traveled about a mile downhill to a forested area that would have given them some protection from the elements, but it has been theorized that Dyatlov did not want to lose the altitude that he had made, and thought that he could just wait for better weather. Back in Sverdlovsk, Yuri Yudin was recuperating, and just before Dyatlov left, he informed Yudin that he would send a telegram once the team had returned to Vizhai. Dyatlov told Yudin that he expected to return no later than February 12th. When the 12th came and went, Yudin assumed that they were delayed for one reason or another, but was not concerned, as delays were quite common. However, when no word was heard by the 20th, Yudin and family members of the expedition team contacted the police. On February 26, as the search for the missing hikers began, the search crew discovered Dyatlov and his team's tent, still on the side of the mountain with no one in sight. Strangely, the tent appeared to be cut open from the inside, and all of the team's clothes were still in the tent, meaning something so bad had happened that the entire team cut the tent open and fled in just their underwear. But even more bizarrely, there were 9 sets of bare footprints leading away from the tent, but they were not panicked or disorganized as one might expect. Instead, it was as if they hurriedly cut open their tent, left all of their clothes in a panic, and then just calmly walked down the mountains in sub-zero temperatures. The next day, on the 27th, the search crew was confident that they would find Dyatlov and his team alive and well, as it had not been that long since the group went missing, and, as mentioned before, Dyatlov and his team were highly experienced hikers. While combing through the area, the search crew noticed a large Siberian pine at the edge of a forest, with its branches broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting that one of the hikers had climbed the tree to get a better view or to look for something. At the base of the tree there were old fire remains, and surrounding the fire were the bodies of 21-year-old Yuri Doroshenko and 23-year-old Yuri Krivonashenko. After a bit more searching, the bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolomogorova, and Rustam Slobodin were found at varying distances from the tree. The remaining 4 of the team would not be discovered until May 4th. Ludmila Dubanina, Alexander Kolotov, Nikolai Bringolis, and Simon Zolotaryov were found under 4 meters or 13 feet of snow in a ravine. The 4 found at the ravine were a little better dressed than the others, and it has been theorized that the team members that died at the tree had their clothes removed so that they could be used for others. Finding the remaining 4 hikers would change the entire narrative of the investigation. Initially, the lead medical examiner concluded that, although the team members found at or near the tree had injuries, all of the people died of hypothermia. After the rest of the team was found in May, this theory began to fall apart, as Brignoles was found to have major skull damage, and Dubanina and Zolotaryov had sustained major chest fractures similar to being hit with a car. Bizarrely, Dubanina and Zolotaryov had no external injuries related to the chest fractures. It's as if they were both subject to enough force to break most of their ribs, but not a single bruise could be found on their chests. On top of this, Dubanina was also missing her tongue, lips, and her eyes. Zolotaryov also had his eyes missing, and Kolotov was missing his eyebrows. After these gruesome finds, speculation initially turned to the local indigenous Mansi people. It was theorized that Dyatlov and his team had unknowingly trespassed on their land and had attacked and murdered the group. At first glance, it makes sense. The Mansi tribe had lived in the area for hundreds of years and would have detailed knowledge about the area. Also, the tribe was known to be distrustful of outsiders. This murder hypothesis would explain why there were such devastating injuries, and the fact that all of the hikers calmly walked from their tent. Could it be that Dyatlov and his team noticed the attack coming and cut open their tent, only to be surrounded and led into the forest, where they were subsequently murdered? Once you look a bit deeper, this theory begins to fall apart. Firstly, there was no other evidence of other footprints other than the 9 hikers. And secondly, there was no evidence that there had been a struggle to begin with. Finally, some of the injuries that the team sustained would be impossible for other humans to inflict. Eventually, after interrogating the local tribe, it was ruled out that they had anything to do with the expedition, and eventually, this theory has been entirely ruled out. Another popular theory is that the team could have encountered an avalanche. Some of the evidence supporting this theory is that the group's tent was situated on the slope of the Kholat Sikil mountain, and that the team rushed to the woods where the avalanche's snow would have been slowed. In the rush of trying to escape the avalanche, they were separated, and while trying to make their way back to the tent, got lost in the dark and froze to death. This theory explains why Dubanina, Kolotov, Brignoles, and Zolotaryov were found months later under 4 meters of snow. Could it be that they were killed by the supposed avalanche, while the others escaped but eventually froze to death? While this theory is more plausible than the Mansi tribe murder theory, there are several contradicting facts that make the avalanche theory somewhat unsubstantiated. For instance, Dyatlov and his team supposedly died on the night of February 1st, and the search crew did not begin looking for them until the 26th. In all that time, the search crew were still able to identify the expedition's tent, and even their footprints. If an avalanche really did occur, then certainly the tent would be buried in snow, let alone the footprints being visible. Another contradiction is that, if you recall, all of Dyatlov's team were highly experienced hikers, with Zolotaryov specifically studying for his master's in ski instruction and mountain hiking. Needless to say that even though they were camped up on the slope of a mountain, the team would very likely know the signs of an avalanche-prone area, and to stay well away from it. There is another theory that blames the deaths of Dyatlov's team on something called katabatic winds. This natural phenomenon happens when high-density, intensely cold air from the top of plateaus, glaciers, or mountains travels downslope, freezing everything in its path. Katabatic winds have been known to rush down a mountain at hurricane speeds, leaving little time for people to get out of the way. If these katabatic winds did happen, Dyatlov and his team would have no choice but to leave the tent, as the temperatures outside the effect of the katabatic winds would have actually been warmer, despite the temperatures that night being negative 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. One fact that supports this theory is that when the search crew found the abandoned tent, they found a flashlight that was on top of the tent turned on. This might have been done intentionally, so that the team could find the tent once the winds had died down. Although this theory seems probable, katabatic winds are known to be rare and more commonly occur in Antarctica or the Arctic. Also, in the over 100 expeditions since Dyatlov's in 1959, not a single one had experienced katabatic winds. The final theory that people have suggested is that the Soviet Union covered up what actually happened to Dyatlov and his team. There is one more piece of evidence that I haven't mentioned yet. What little amount of clothes that Dyatlov and his team were wearing the night they died were actually covered in trace amounts of radiation. One possible theory that people have proposed is that Dyatlov and his team were unknowingly in the path of a Soviet bombardment. Remember, this was during the height of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union was scrambling to outdo the United States, including testing bombs. Could it be that Dyatlov and his team were awoken by the sounds of explosions getting louder and louder, and, to survive, fled the tent to have some sort of safety in the woods? This theory would explain the grotesque injuries that some of the team had sustained. Maybe some of the team were hit by the bombs, and the Soviet Union, not wanting people to find out, covered the whole thing up. Another fact that supports this theory is that all of the documents pertaining to this incident were completely classified for 3 years, and, when they were declassified, most of the information was blacked out. There are so many conflicting theories about what happened to Dyatlov and his team, but none fully answer all of the questions. We may never know what really happened to Igor Dyatlov and his team on that cold and tragic night. Was it an avalanche, or perhaps something more supernatural? It could be that the Soviets never even properly documented the incident to begin with. Whatever the case, it has captured the imagination of thousands of people. Maybe in the future there will be some new evidence brought to this 65-year-old case that will shed some light and finally solve the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass Incident.